The midday hustle filled the small restaurant Marina's table. Among the clinking of cutlery and scattered conversations, a young waitress moved nimbly between tables. It was Sophia, with her impeccably clean apron and a smile that, though sincere, couldn't hide the fatigue in her honey-colored eyes. In a corner of the establishment, almost unnoticed, a man of simple appearance had just occupied a table. He wore an unpretentious light blue shirt and casual pants, but there was something in his way of observing the surroundings that made him different. He was Daniel Montero, though no one in the restaurant would know that for now. Daniel had built an empire in the gastronomy sector. His high-end restaurants spread across the country's main cities, and his name was synonymous with culinary excellence. However, today he wasn't here as the magnate he was. His presence had a deeper purpose: to understand the true difficulties faced by small restaurants and, more importantly, to know the authenticity of people who struggled day by day in this business. While waiting for his order, a muffled sob caught his attention. It came from the kitchen. Discreetly, Daniel got up under the pretense of going to the bathroom. Passing near the kitchen door, he could see Sophia, leaning against the wall, talking through tears with an older man who appeared to be the chef. "I can't lose the house, Carlos," she whispered. "The debts keep growing and my mother needs the medications." Daniel returned to his seat, thoughtful. What began as simple observation was about to become something much more significant. This story was just beginning, and he had the power to change it completely. Marina's Table wasn't a pretentious restaurant. Located on a corner in San Jose neighborhood, the place was distinguished by its terracotta-colored facade and a modest wooden sign that had withstood the test of time. The large windows let in natural light, illuminating the 12 tables strategically distributed in the rectangular dining room space. Marina, the owner, had inherited the business from her parents 15 years ago. She was a 50-year-old woman who carried the weight of family tradition on her shoulders. Each morning she arrived before sunrise to prepare the bread dough and organize the day's preparations. Her hands, marked by years of work, knew every corner of that kitchen like the lines of her own palm. At the stoves, Carlos represented the beating heart of the restaurant. With more than a decade of experience as a chef, his creations maintained the perfect balance between traditional cuisine and their limited resources. At 40 years old, the wrinkles around his eyes deepened every time he smiled, which he did frequently, despite the circumstances. Regular customers formed part of the place's soul. Don Pedro, a retiree who occupied table 3 every morning, invariably ordered his coffee with freshly baked bread. Mrs. Carmen, an elegant widow who lunched alone by the window, always had a kind word for Sophia. Mr. Ramirez, owner of the hardware store on the corner, appeared punctually at 2 o'clock with his employees. The walls decorated with black and white photographs of the old neighborhood silently told the place's history. The red and white checkered tablecloths, though not new, remained impeccable thanks to Sophia's meticulous care. The lace curtains filtered light, creating dancing shadows on the tables, giving the environment a homey touch that customers appreciated. During lunch service, the restaurant came to life. The aromas escaping from the kitchen mixed with the murmur of conversations, creating that unique atmosphere that only family restaurants manage to achieve. The daily menu, written in chalk on a blackboard near the entrance, offered simple dishes but prepared with dedication. However, the signs of wear were beginning to be evident to the most attentive eyes. The wall paint showed discolored areas, some chairs creaked dangerously, and the old ceiling fan made an irregular noise that had become part of the place's soundtrack. In the kitchen, appliances worked more on willpower than technical capacity. Sophia observed all this while moving between tables. Her eyes caught the small details: the way Marina sighed while reviewing bills in her small office, how Carlos juggled ingredients to stretch portions, and the way some regular customers increasingly spaced out their visits. Despite the obvious difficulties, the restaurant maintained that special warmth that only places with history can have. It was more than a business. It was a meeting point, a refuge where homemade flavors mixed with the human warmth of those who frequented it. The dim lights of the establishment, strategically placed, created a cozy atmosphere that invited people to stay, while the aroma of freshly made coffee and bread straight from the oven reminded everyone why Marina's Table remained the neighborhood's gastronomic heart. Daniel observed every detail while Sophia approached his table with the menu. His years of experience in the sector allowed him to notice aspects that others would overlook. the slight tremor in the waitress's hands, the characteristic smell of an oven needing maintenance, the irregular sound of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Welcome to Marina's table," said Sophia with a smile that didn't reach her reddened eyes. "May I suggest today's menu? We have homemade vegetable soup and baked chicken with potatoes." "I'd like something simple," Daniel replied, maintaining his role as a common customer. "What do you personally recommend?" While Sophia described the dishes, Daniel noticed how Marina, from the small office visible through a half-open door, held her head in her hands, surrounded by papers. Carlos approached her, wiping his hands on his apron, and closed the door behind him. Through the glass, their silent but intense conversation could be seen. "The house stew," Daniel finally decided. "And a glass of water, please." While waiting for his order, the restaurant's dynamics unfolded before his eyes like a play. Regular customers interacted with a familiarity that only comes with years of regular visits. However, there were too many empty tables for lunchtime. In the kitchen, Marina's voice momentarily rose. "I don't know how much longer we can hold on, Carlos. The suppliers are pressuring and the bank—" Her voice faded when she noticed she had spoken too loudly. Carlos calmed her with a paternal gesture, but the worry on his face was evident. Sophia, passing nearby with a tray, slowed her steps, and Daniel could see how she bit her lower lip, containing her own emotions. The stew arrived steaming at the table. Despite the establishment's evident problems, the aroma was promising. Daniel tried a bite and confirmed what his nose had anticipated. The recipe was excellent, with that taste that only traditional cooking can achieve. "Is everything to your liking?" asked Sophia, returning to the table. Her eyes shone with contained tears, though she tried to maintain her professional composure. "It's delicious," Daniel replied sincerely. "Is it a family recipe?" "Yes, sir. Doña Marina's mother created it more than 30 years ago. All the ingredients are—" A metallic noise from the kitchen interrupted her explanation. Carlos had dropped a pot, cursing under his breath while trying to repair the loose handle with adhesive tape. Marina quickly left her office, helping him clean up the mess while whispering something about not being able to afford replacements for now. Sophia apologized and ran to help, leaving Daniel with his thoughts. He observed how the small team worked in sync, supporting each other through each minor crisis, like a family that stays united in difficult times. Through the window, the afternoon sun began to descend, casting long shadows on the checkered tablecloths. The restaurant gradually emptied, and with each table that became vacant, the tension in Marina's shoulders seemed to increase. Daniel finished his meal in silence, each bite confirming his initial impression. There was real talent in that kitchen, drowned by economic circumstances. While discreetly wiping his mouth with the napkin, he began to formulate a plan in his mind. But first he needed to see more, understand more. The restaurant's quiet atmosphere was interrupted by the crash of a chair being roughly dragged. At table 6, a man in a wrinkled suit and loose tie had stood up, his face reddened with anger. "This is unacceptable," he shouted, waving the bill in the air. 15 minutes late with my order, and you expect me to pay this price?" Sophia approached quickly, trying to maintain calm. Her hands trembled slightly while holding the empty tray against her chest, as if it were a shield. "Sir, I apologize for the delay. As I explained, we had a small problem in the kitchen, but—" "I don't care about your excuses," the man interrupted. "And now you have the nerve to include the service charge? Ha, service, you call this service?" Daniel observed the scene from his table, noticing how other diners lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Marina had left her office upon hearing the shouts, but kept her distance, evaluating whether to intervene. "Sir, the service charge is optional," Sophia explained in a soft voice, though Daniel could see her eyes moistening. "If you prefer, I can bring you a new bill without—" "Of course I'm not paying the tip," the customer snapped, throwing several bills on the table. "And you can be sure I'll never return to this place, and I'll make sure my colleagues don't either." The man left the restaurant with a slam that made the window panes tinkle. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia, with dignity, collected the money and began cleaning the table, her mechanical movements revealing years of experience handling similar situations. Daniel noticed a solitary tear that she quickly dried with the back of her hand. However, what impressed him most was seeing how, minutes later, Sophia approached the next table with a renewed smile, as if the incident had never occurred. "Sophia," he called softly when she passed near his table, "could you bring me a coffee, please?" She nodded, grateful for the kindness in his tone. When she returned with the coffee, Daniel invited her to sit for a moment, noting that the restaurant had emptied considerably. "You shouldn't let people like that affect you," he commented, while adding sugar to his coffee. "I've been to many restaurants and I can assure you your service is exceptional." Sophia smiled weakly. "Thank you, sir. It's just that every tip counts these days. My mother is sick and the medications are expensive. Besides, I help Marina with the restaurant expenses when I can, although it's not much." She stopped abruptly, as if she had said too much. Daniel noticed how her fingers nervously played with the edge of her apron, a gesture that betrayed her anxiety. "Sometimes I wonder if all this is worth it," she continued quietly, looking around the almost empty restaurant. "But Doña Marina and Carlos are like family to me. I couldn't abandon them, especially now that things are so difficult." Daniel nodded understandingly, while observing how Carlos from the kitchen signaled Sophia to attend to a new customer who had just entered. She apologized and quickly stood up, returning to her routine with renewed determination. As he watched her walk away, Daniel took a sip of his coffee, thoughtful. Sophia's dignity and loyalty had impressed him more than any resume he had read in his companies. However, something in his instinct told him that the real tests were just beginning. The doorbell rang with a threatening tinkle. A corpulent man, about 60 years old, dressed in an impeccable grey suit and shiny shoes, entered the restaurant with firm steps. The atmosphere changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Mr. Almeida," Marina whispered, visibly paling. Carlos peeked from the kitchen and quickly disappeared again, as if wanting to avoid witnessing what was about to come. Marina," Almeida pronounced, dragging the words while approaching the counter. "Do you know what day it is today?" Daniel, still at his table, pretended to read the newspaper while listening intently. Sophia had frozen beside the coffee maker, holding a half-filled cup. "Mr. Almeida, please," Marina began, lowering her voice. "We could talk in my office." "What for?" he interrupted, deliberately raising his tone. "So you can tell me the same as always? To hear more excuses about late payments?" The few remaining customers in the restaurant began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some left money on their tables and discreetly exited. "I assure you that next week," Marina tried to explain. "Next week?" Almeida mocked, hitting the counter with his palm. "That's what you told me a month ago, and the one before. Do you know how long I've been waiting? Patience has its limits, Marina, and you've exceeded mine." Daniel observed how Marina's hands trembled while trying to maintain composure. Sophia had left the cup and approached her boss, offering silent support. "You have until Friday," Almeida declared, leaning over the counter. "And this time it's non-negotiable. Either you pay everything you owe or this place will have a new owner, is that clear?" "But that's impossible," Marina murmured, her voice breaking. "It's only 3 days." "Not my problem," Almeida cut in, adjusting his tie. "You should have thought about that before borrowing. Friday, Marina, not 1 day more." The man turned on his heels and headed toward the exit. Before crossing the door, he stopped and added with a malicious smile, "By the way, interest keeps running. I'll send you the new amount in the morning." The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Marina collapsed into a chair while Sophia ran to get her a glass of water. Carlos emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on his apron, his somber face reflecting the gravity of the situation. "How much is it?" Carlos asked quietly. "Too much," Marina responded, burying her face in her hands. "With the interest, it's impossible. Simply impossible." Daniel continued observing the scene, his mind working quickly. He knew men like Almeida well. He had seen too many in his years in the business world. Lenders who took advantage of small businesses in trouble, squeezing out every last drop before executing their threats. From his table, he could see how the team gathered around Marina, offering comfort and suggestions they knew would be useless. The unity they showed in adversity was remarkable, but also moving in its helplessness. The afternoon sun cast elongated shadows through the restaurant's windows, as if even natural light wanted to escape the darkness Almeida had brought with him. Daniel took a final sip of his coffee, his decision to intervene strengthening with each passing second. Daniel waited for the right moment to make his next move. When Sophia approached to collect his empty coffee cup, he extracted several high-denomination bills from his wallet. "The bill, please," he requested softly. "And this is for you," he added, handing her the generous tip directly. Sophia's eyes opened in surprise at seeing the amount. "Sir, this is too much. I can't accept it. Please, I insist." Daniel responded with a kind smile, "and I was wondering if you could show me the kitchen. The aroma of the dishes has intrigued me all afternoon." Sophia hesitated for a moment, looking toward Marina, who nodded distractedly, still affected by Almeida's visit. The young waitress tucked the tip into her apron with trembling hands and guided Daniel toward the kitchen. The space was smaller than it appeared from outside, but was organized with military precision. Carlos, who was preparing the bases for dinner, looked up curiously. "Impressive organization system," Daniel commented, observing the labels on containers and workflow. His expert eyes noticed details others would overlook: how Carlos had adapted the limited space, creative storage solutions, the efficient arrangement of utensils. "Are you interested in professional cooking?" Carlos asked, intrigued by Daniel's technical comments. "You could say that," he responded enigmatically. "Is that sauce you're preparing the base for the stew?" "You have a good eye." Carlos smiled. "It's a family recipe that—" "Sophia," Daniel interrupted, turning to the young woman, "would you mind preparing something for me? Whatever you'd like." The request took everyone by surprise. Sophia looked at Carlos, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, she hesitated. "I could prepare my specialty. Apple pie with cinnamon and caramelized walnuts." "Perfect." Daniel smiled, watching how she moved with surprising confidence toward the pastry area. While Sophia worked, Daniel noticed the naturalness with which her hands moved among ingredients, the precision in her measurements without needing scales, the delicacy with which she treated each element. There was no waste, every movement had a purpose. The aroma of cinnamon began to fill the kitchen, mixing with freshly made caramel. Carlos, who had continued with his work, cast looks of paternal pride toward Sophia. "She learned quickly," the chef commented quietly to Daniel. "She has a natural gift for pastry. If circumstances were different—" He left the sentence hanging, returning to his pots. Daniel observed how Sophia decorated the pie with artistic precision, her eyes shining with genuine passion for the first time that day. "Ready," she finally announced, presenting a dessert that could have been in the window of any luxury pastry shop. Daniel took the first bite in silence. The dough was perfect, crispy outside and soft inside. The apples, cooked to the exact point, melted with the caramel in perfect harmony. The walnuts added texture and a touch of sophistication to the whole. "Extraordinary," he murmured, and it wasn't an empty compliment. As owner of several Michelin-starred restaurants, he recognized talent when he saw it. Sophia's face lit up with the compliment, but the joy was ephemeral. Through the kitchen window, they could see Marina still sitting in her office, desperately reviewing papers. Daniel wiped his lips with a napkin, his mind already formulating the next step of his plan. The talent was there. It just needed the right opportunity to shine. The sound of firm steps and the tinkling of metal badges interrupted the moment. Two health inspectors, with their official uniforms and folders in hand, entered the restaurant without warning. "Surprise inspection," announced the taller one, showing his identification. "Please, we need full access to the facilities." The color drained from Marina's face as she rushed out of her office. Carlos began frantically organizing his workstation, while Sophia quickly hid some utensils with small dents. Daniel remained in his place, watching as the inspectors began their meticulous tour. His trained eyes immediately noticed the problematic points: the worn refrigerator seal, small cracks in some tiles, the extractor fan working at half power. "The temperature log, please," requested one of the inspectors, adjusting his glasses. Marina nervously searched through her papers. "I have it right here, just a moment." While the inspectors checked every corner of the kitchen, Daniel noticed how Sophia moved restlessly, her eyes fixed on a small notebook she kept in her apron. During a pause in the inspection, she approached him and whispered, "You know? I always dreamed of having my own pastry shop," she confessed, while watching the inspectors take notes. "I have all my designs and recipes here." She gently patted her notebook. "But with Mom's debts, and now this," her voice faded when one of the inspectors pointed to a damp spot on the ceiling. "This needs immediate repair," he declared severely. "And the ventilation system doesn't meet current standards." Marina tried to maintain composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "Of course we'll fix it. You have 48 hours to correct these deficiencies," the inspector stated, closing his folder. "Otherwise, we'll be forced to close the establishment." The silence that followed their departure was deafening. Carlos leaned heavily against the counter, while Marina collapsed into a chair, defeated. "How are we going to get the money for repairs?" she murmured. With Almeida's debt. Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the inspection, approached the pastry display where Sophia's pie still rested. He studied it carefully, as if making an important decision. "Sophia," he called softly, "could you show me that notebook of yours?" The young woman hesitated a moment before handing over her most precious treasure. Daniel began leafing through the pages, finding meticulous drawings of cakes, detailed recipes, and carefully noted cost calculations. "Impressive," he murmured, stopping at a particularly elaborate design. "How long have you been planning this?" 3 years, she replied, blushing slightly. "Each month I set aside some tips, but it's never enough. And now with all this..." Daniel carefully closed the notebook and returned it. His business mind was already evaluating possibilities, calculating risks and opportunities. The talent was there, raw but undeniable. The passion was evident. Only one thing was missing: opportunity. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "crises are just the prelude to great changes." He headed toward his table where he had left his briefcase, aware that the moment to reveal his true identity was approaching. But first, he needed one final test, a final confirmation that his instinct about this place and its people wasn't wrong. "Marina," Daniel called, his voice adopting a slightly more formal tone, "could you prepare something special for me? Whatever you consider the best representation of this restaurant." The owner looked at him confused, still overwhelmed by recent events. "Sir, with all due respect, we just had an inspection and..." "Please," he insisted softly. "Consider it a last chance to demonstrate what this place can offer." Something in his tone made Marina exchange looks with Carlos. The chef nodded slightly, as if he had perceived something the others hadn't yet noticed. "Grandmother's stew," suggested Carlos, "with the special spices." Marina seemed to hesitate for a moment before nodding. "We'll need at least an hour." "I have time," Daniel replied, settling at his table. While the team got moving, he began sharing some observations. "You know, I've noticed you keep the oil at the perfect temperature for frying. Not all restaurants pay attention to those details, and your mise en place arrangement is exceptional, considering the limited space." Carlos stopped in the middle of his preparation, surprised by the technical knowledge of the supposed common customer. Sophia, who was cleaning a nearby table, also paid attention. "The key is in organization," Daniel continued, "and in keeping costs under control. For example, have you considered changing your vegetable suppliers? Central market prices are 30% lower than traditional distributors." Marina emerged from the kitchen, intrigued. "How do you know?" At that moment, the doorbell rang again. An elegant man, about 50 years old, entered the restaurant. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Javier Ruiz, the city's most influential food critic. Marina's heart seemed to stop. "Oh God," she whispered. "We can't receive a critic now, not with the kitchen like this." "You can," Daniel affirmed with conviction, "and you will. Continue with my order, but also prepare the best you have for him." The restaurant entered controlled frenzy. Carlos returned to the kitchen with renewed energy, while Sophia hurriedly arranged the tables. Marina seemed about to faint. "Take a deep breath," Daniel advised. "Your team knows what they're doing, they just need to trust their instincts." During the next hour, the aroma emanating from the kitchen gradually transformed into something extraordinary. Grandmother's stew, enriched with Carlos's secret spices, began attracting curious glances from the street. Javier Ruiz ate in silence, taking occasional notes in his small notebook. His expression, normally severe, softened slightly upon tasting the main course. Daniel observed everything with contained satisfaction. He had carefully chosen the moment for the critic to appear, though no one knew it yet. When he finally tasted his own dish, he couldn't help a smile of approval. The stew was perfect. The meat melted in the mouth, the vegetables maintained their ideal texture, and the balance of flavors was masterful. "Do you know what makes a restaurant special?" he asked aloud as Marina nervously approached his table. "It's not just the dishes or the decoration. It's the heart that beats in its kitchen, the team's passion, the story each recipe tells." He wiped his lips with the napkin and slowly stood up. It was time to reveal who he really was, but before he could do so, he saw how Javier Ruiz called Sophia to ask her some questions about the desserts. The moment of truth was about to arrive, and with it, an unexpected turn in the story of Marina's table. "Extraordinary," declared Javier Ruiz, closing his notebook with a definitive gesture. "Simply extraordinary. It had been years since I tasted such authentic stew." Marina, who had been holding her breath, let out a shaky sigh. Sophia pressed her tray against her chest, while Carlos peeked from the kitchen, his face shining with sweat and hope. "The review will be published tomorrow," announced the critic, standing up, "and I can tell you in advance that it will be memorable." It was then that Daniel decided the moment had come. He rose from his table and approached the group. "Thank you for coming, Javier," he said naturally. "I knew you would appreciate the authenticity of this place." Marina's eyes opened in surprise at seeing the familiarity with which this apparently common customer addressed the famous critic. Javier, for his part, smiled complicitly. "Daniel Montero," he finally introduced himself, extending his hand to a stunned Marina, "owner of the Montero Gastronomic Group." The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia dropped her tray, which resonated against the tiled floor. Carlos came completely out of the kitchen, forgetting the sauce he had on the fire. "The Daniel Montero," Marina whispered, her voice barely audible. "The one with the Michelin-starred restaurants?" "The same," he confirmed with a kind smile, "and I'm here to make you a proposal." He went to his briefcase and extracted several documents. "I've spent the day observing, learning about you. I saw passion, dedication, and extraordinary talent. I also saw the challenges you face." He spread the papers on a nearby table. "My proposal is simple. I want to invest in Marina's table, not to change it, but to preserve its essence and help it grow." "But, Mr. Almeida," Marina began. "The debt will be settled first thing tomorrow," Daniel assured. "And as for the repairs required by the health inspection, my maintenance team will start working tonight if you accept." He turned to Sophia, who remained motionless, still processing what was happening. "And for you, I have a special project. Your talent for pastry is exceptional. I propose opening a pastry shop annexed to the restaurant under your direction." Tears began running down Sophia's cheeks. Carlos approached and surrounded her with a protective arm. "Why?" Marina managed to ask. "Why us?" Daniel smiled, remembering his own beginnings. "Because in this place I found something money can't buy. Authenticity. I found a family that fights together, that stays united in difficult times, and that, believe me, is worth more than any Michelin star." Javier Ruiz, who had remained silent, nodded in approval. "My review tomorrow will be just the beginning," he commented. "This place has a story that deserves to be told." Marina took the documents with trembling hands, reading each page while tears blurred her vision. Carlos and Sophia approached, forming a circle around the table. "So?" Daniel asked softly. "Do you accept being part of something bigger without losing who you are?" Marina looked at her team, her chosen family, and saw in their eyes the same hope she felt. With a trembling smile, she took the pen Daniel offered. "Welcome to Marina's table," she said, and signed the documents that would mark the beginning of a new era for the small restaurant in San Jose neighborhood. The next morning dawned with promises of change, but fate had other plans. Just as the team was beginning to organize the restaurant for renovations, the door opened violently. Mr. Almeida entered like a storm, followed by two burly men. "Marina!" he roared, his voice echoing in the empty place. "Time's up!" Sophia and Carlos stood paralyzed by the counter, while Marina emerged from her office holding the documents Daniel had left the night before. "Mr. Almeida," she began, but he interrupted her with a brusque gesture. "I don't want excuses," he growled. "Either you pay me right now, or my friends here will start evicting the place." The two men stepped forward, cracking their knuckles threateningly. Sophia stifled a cry when one of them approached a table and overturned it with contempt. "Stop!" a firm voice resonated from the entrance. Daniel Montero appeared in the doorway, dressed in an impeccable black suit and accompanied by his lawyer. "And who the hell are you?" Almeida spat, turning to face the newcomer. "I'm the new majority partner of Marina's table," Daniel responded with studied calm. "And I understand you have a pending matter with this establishment." Almeida let out a harsh laugh. "Partner of this dump? Don't make me laugh. This place isn't worth half of what they owe me." Daniel signaled his lawyer, who brought forward a briefcase. "I have here the total amount of the debt plus corresponding interest," he declared, opening the briefcase on a nearby table. "Although I must warn you, my auditors found some irregularities in your interest rates that might interest the tax authorities." Almeida's face paled slightly. His thugs exchanged uncomfortable looks. "Who are you really?" Almeida asked, his voice losing some of its previous bravado. "Daniel Montero, from Montero Gastronomic Group," he responded, taking out his business card. "Perhaps you've heard of us. We have certain influence in the sector and excellent lawyers. The change in Almeida's expression was immediate. Color completely abandoned his face when he finally recognized the name. You have two options, Daniel continued, his voice calm but firm. You can take the money that's legally yours and sign a settlement, or we can discuss all your credit operations in court. The choice is yours. A tense silence filled the restaurant. Sofia and Carlos held their breath, while Marina watched the scene in disbelief. Almeida looked at the briefcase with the money, then at his thugs, and finally at Daniel. Defeat slowly drew on his face. Give him the papers, he finally muttered, loosening his tie with a trembling finger. Daniel's lawyer proceeded efficiently with the paperwork, while the thugs backed toward the door, suddenly aware that their presence was no longer necessary or welcome. And Almeida, Daniel called when the lender was about to leave. If I learn you're harassing other restaurants in the neighborhood, our next conversation will be much less friendly. When the door closed behind them, Marina collapsed into a chair, trembling. Sofia ran to hug her while Carlos murmured a prayer of thanks. Is everything all right? Daniel asked softly, placing a comforting hand on Marina's shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Thank you for saving us. Daniel smiled, taking out his phone. This is just the beginning, he announced. The renovation team will arrive in an hour. Are you ready to start the transformation? 3 weeks later, Marina's table was unrecognizable, but not because it had lost its essence. The walls, now in a warm terracotta tone, still displayed the old neighborhood photographs, though elegantly framed. The wooden tables had been restored, not replaced, preserving the marks that told stories of decades of service. It's perfect, Marina sighed, observing the new industrial kitchen gleaming under the LED lights. It maintains the soul of the place, but now it can reach its true potential, Daniel completed, while supervising the installation of the new professional oven. Carlos was already familiarizing himself with the equipment, his eyes shining like a child's on Christmas. In the annexed space, previously an unused warehouse, Sofia stood in the middle of what would soon be her pastry shop. The refrigerated display cases were already installed, and the aroma of her first test batch of pastries filled the air. Ready for the grand opening? Daniel asked, approaching her. Sofia nodded, though her hands trembled slightly while arranging her creations in the display case. I still can't believe this is real, she confessed. Well, believe it, Daniel smiled, handing her a folder. Here's your first official order. The Continental Hotel wants your pastries for their corporate events. Sofia's eyes filled with tears as she read the contract. It was more money than she had imagined earning in a year. The doorbell rang, and the restaurant began to fill up. News of the renovation had spread through the neighborhood, and old customers were returning, bringing with them new diners intrigued by the changes. Don Pedro, the regular breakfast customer, occupied his usual table. The same coffee as always, but now in a more elegant cup, he joked, winking at Marina. Mrs. Carmen, from her favorite window, was trying one of Sofia's new desserts. Child, she called to the young pastry chef, this is pure art. Daniel observed everything from a corner, satisfied. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Javier Ruiz. The review had sparked interest in the restaurant, and reservations were full for the coming weeks. Marina, he called, approaching the owner, there's something else I want to show you all. He led the team to the renovated office, where a map of the city occupied an entire wall. Phase 2 of the project, he announced, pointing to various spots on the map. Small family restaurants like yours that need an opportunity. I want you to be part of the team that will help them transform. Us? Carlos asked, surprised. Who better than you, who went through all this, to understand and guide others? Daniel responded. Besides, Sofia, your pastries can be in all these places. The young pastry chef brought her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed by the possibility. But, Daniel continued, we'll follow the same principle, preserving the essence of each place, its history, its soul. We don't want to create identical chains, but help each restaurant shine with its own light. Marina looked around. The kitchen was buzzing with activity. The tables were full. The aroma of Sofia's pastries mixed with Carlos's dishes, and customers' laughter filled the air. Her small restaurant hadn't just been saved. It had become the beginning of something much bigger. So, Daniel asked, extending his hand, are you ready to help others fulfill their dreams? The hands of Marina, Carlos, and Sofia joined his in a silent gesture of commitment. Marina's table was no longer just a restaurant. It was the first chapter of a story of transformation and hope. The afternoon sun filtered through the renovated windows of Marina's table, bathing the place in a golden glow. 3 months after the transformation, the restaurant vibrated with a different but familiar energy. In the kitchen, Carlos masterfully directed 2 new apprentices, sharing the secrets of traditional recipes that were now served on elegant dinnerware, but without losing their homemade flavor. Marina, with new confidence in her step, walked among the tables, greeting customers by name. A perfect mix of familiar faces and new diners attracted by the place's growing fame. Sophia's pastry shop, Sweet Dreams, had become a destination in itself. Her creations not only supplied the restaurant and the Continental Hotel, but were now also distributed to 5 cafes in the neighborhood. Her eyes shone with the same passion, but no longer with tears of worry. Daniel, observing from his usual corner table, reflected on how a simple day of observation had triggered so much positive change. It wasn't just about commercial success. It was about preserving the magic of small family restaurants, about giving opportunities to those who deserved them. Sometimes, he thought while savoring a piece of Sophia's apple pie, true success isn't measured in numbers, but in smiles, in fulfilled dreams, in preserved stories. The restaurant had become a symbol of hope for other small businesses in the neighborhood. It was living proof that with proper support, passion and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Marina's table remained a neighborhood restaurant, but now it was much more. It was a testimony to the power of empathy, solidarity, and faith in dreams.